Hi, I'm Niklas Hallin and this is the Neckbolt vlog and this is Andrew.
Hi.
He's making the same game as I am.
I mean, maybe a little bit, but also it's really different. Your game is mostly about puzzle. It comes from the same place where we were both inspired by Zelda games. And I've decided to get rid of all the puzzles, and you've decided to basically...
to emphasize them.
Yeah, so the combat in your game is mostly about setting the stage as this is a hostile environment, and the real meat of it is solving these clever puzzles.
Yeah.
And in my game, there aren't really very many puzzles to speak of. No, like block pushing at least. And it's all about fighting monsters. But they both got sort of the same camera angle. Yeah,
and animals.
And animals. And big stories and exciting things happening.
Yeah.
Ancient lore and mysteries to be solved.
Because we come from this, and specifically 2D Zelda. So not the sort of Ocarina of Time kind of tradition, but specifically like Zelda 1 or Link to the Past or something like that.
Yeah.
And then sort of adapting that into modern technology with like 3D cameras and rendering and lighting effects and post effects and all sorts of things. Which is a bit, it's funny how we both kind of did that and how we both kind of ended up with the same sort of, like a screenshot looks kind of similar if you put them together.
Yeah, I think some of the limitations of, let's say the Super Nintendo, Link to the Past, required, especially with that game, because they limited the color palette intentionally. The Super Nintendo could have shown more colors, and you've seen that in games where they've digitized sprites or something, but they intentionally kept everything really simple in order to fit more on the cartridge. And because of that, there's really, like grass is green with a few little dots of darker green.
Yeah, exactly.
And a wall might have this sort of vague, wavy texture of like striation in the earth, but it's not super realistic. No. And you have this cartoony, limited palette that I don't know, makes it seem more like a fun adventure in a bright, sunshiny world.
And also clarity, like that's really important to me. Like it's super clear exactly what's on the screen. So if I have a lot of textures and noise, I kind of feel that details, important gameplay details, get sort of disappear into the noise. Whereas if you have these super clean textures, you can make sure that everything is shown exactly what it needs to be.
Yeah, everything that you, especially in your game where the camera angle is very fixed, you were mentioning before that all the lines are exactly the right weight on the screen.
Exactly.
That's
and
really important.
You can make these compositions, like you can make sure that if you need to spot a treasure chest or a key or something, you can get the camera to actually look at that because the camera is not free.
Yeah, especially with puzzle games, I find there's nothing worse than a puzzle game where either throughout the entire game or at some point they just make it hard to tell what's going on. I'm looking at you, the witness.
But yes, you emphasize combat instead.
Yeah.
Why is that?
So I like games that make me feel like I'm not supposed to be there. Right,
yes. That is actually a theme in your game.
Yeah. So there's a language that you can look at but you can't read. And there's hostile monsters all over the place. And I actually didn't have an older brother, but I had an extra neighbor who I always just assumed was way better at video games than me. He was older, he had more systems, and he was just better at them. And so I always thought of these grand adventures as something that I wasn't really supposed to participate in. And if I happened to step my toe in a little bit, it was this magical world where no one knew I was there and I'm not really supposed to be there. And just like every human being who talks about game design in the modern era, Dark Souls usually comes up.
Yeah, exactly. Dark Souls is intense.
Yeah, and that's very much trying to capture this feeling of, no, you are a tiny creature and you are not supposed to be here.
Exactly.
Which is cool, and I think that's really, at its core, the fundamental difference between our two games.
Yeah, exactly, I was gonna get to that.
Yeah.
Because my game is super designed, whereas in your game where you step into a room, it's like, there might even be a treasure chest that someone else has already opened.
Exactly.
And something that is broken lying to the side that you're not really, doesn't do anything, it's just, you came too late to the party.
Right. If I'm designing a room that has puzzles in it, for instance, the question that in my game needs to be answered is, who built this? Why? Why did they make it so hard to get to this thing? Who are they expecting to come by and solve it?
And how old is it?
Yeah. And sometimes you just want to play a puzzle game and not have to deal with that.
I know, I'm thinking about like Portal. They deliberately set it in like a test chamber. They specifically made it so that this evil computer is giving you these puzzles for no other reasons than because they're puzzles.
And then they managed to subvert it really nicely in the back third of the game.
Yes.
By turning it on its head. And the puzzle design there changes. It
Yes.
no longer feels like you've got these authored solutions. You can't look around the room and think, what does the evil computer want you to do?
Yeah,
You need to look around and use the tools that you've learned in an environment that wasn't meant for you. And so you've got the pristine first 2/3 of Portal.
Yes.
And I'm working on, my aspiration is the grungy back third of Portal.
That's great. And on that note, it's time for this week's Wednesday's report. This week I've created graphics for the main menu and I've made it into a miniature model of the game Cosmos, which of course immediately brings Game of Thrones to mind, but I like it because it chimes so well with the major themes of this game. All three of the peoples of the game are represented here with their cities. The circularity of the planetary orbits represent the cycle of elephants. The God's Eye perspective represents the insight the little elephant must have in order to develop as a character. Other than that, I've also kept working on the robot dungeon and I have added magnets as a new feature, and I'm so glad I did that. Not because I will get that many new puzzles out of them, but because it's hilarious to shoot keys and small metal objects across the room. Now I'm running out of time, but one last thing is that after a tip from Andrew actually, I managed to integrate a system into the game that should take care of all sorts of controller inputs. So now you should be able to play this whatever controller you may have instead of just with an Xbox One, which is what I happen to have access to. That's all for today's episode, but stay tuned for next week when I will be back again. If you want to, you can subscribe to this devlog series on Patreon or directly on YouTube, and you can follow me on Twitter for quick updates. Thank you, and I will see you next time.